The village lay hidden in a shallow valley, where the hills curved around it like protective arms. In the early mornings a pale mist clung to the earth, wrapping the cracked fields and leaning huts in silence. The wind moved slowly here, carrying whispers from one corner of the valley to the next, as if the air itself remembered every secret the land had ever held. This was no ordinary place. The elders said the soil had memory. Every footstep, every drop of blood spilled upon it, every promise or betrayal, sank deep into the ground. It never forgot. Respect it and it would nurture you. Take from it greedily and it would strike back. The villagers had learned this truth the hard way over generations, though many still struggled to believe it. At the far edge of the village, a small farm bore the weight of time and hardship. Its fences leaned at awkward angles, and the roof sagged as if it had long given up on sheltering its weary occupants. The soil in the fields had grown thin and cracked. Years of drought, poverty, and loss had drained it of life. This farm belonged to a poor farmer and his wife, a couple whose faces carried the invisible map of suffering. The husband rose each morning with a heaviness in his shoulders and a dullness in his eyes. He worked the land tirelessly, but his heart no longer trusted it. The failures of the past seasons had hardened him. He saw the earth only as a burden, a cruel reminder of life's unrelenting hardships. His hands moved mechanically, planting seeds and turning the soil, yet he carried no hope for their growth. His wife, however, was different. She noticed the small signs that others overlooked: the way the soil softened near the roots of certain trees, the subtle warmth that lingered in the earth after the first rays of sun touched it, the low hum of life beneath her feet that only she seemed to feel. She approached the land with reverence, pressing her palms to its surface, whispering thanks to it, and treating it as though it were a living being. To her, the soil was not a thing to be used, it was a companion, a witness, a keeper of secrets. Some nights, when the world was still and her husband slept in weary silence, she dreamed of the earth's memory. She saw twisted roots like veins stretching far below the surface, feeding on stories long forgotten. She saw hands that had once tilled this soil in greed and despair, faces of ancestors whose promises had been broken, and rivers of red that had soaked the ground centuries ago. She woke trembling, yet with a strange calm, as if the land had shared something essential, something urgent, that only she could understand. The elders often warned of the land's power. They whispered that it rewarded respect and punished greed. They told stories of men and women who had ignored these warnings and vanished, swallowed by fields that seemed harmless by day but betrayed them in the dark. The wife listened to these stories not with fear, but with understanding. She knew the earth was not an enemy, but it demanded careful attention. One misstep, one act of greed, and the land would remember, and the memory would be cruel. The farm's soil had been patient with them for years, giving just enough to survive, but never enough to prosper. Each season, the wife worked harder, speaking softly to the earth, singing songs her grandmother had taught her. She thanked the soil for its generosity, no matter how small. When the wind rustled through the empty fields, she imagined the land answering, whispering back in voices only she could hear. Something lay beneath this soil, ancient and quiet, sleeping through the years of drought and hardship. It was patient as the earth itself, and it had watched her family struggle. It had felt the farmer's bitterness, the wife's care, the weight of their losses. And it remembered everything. The wife did not yet know the depth of what lay below her feet. She did not know that her quiet attentiveness, her careful listening to the land, would one day awaken something that could no longer remain hidden. The farmer, burdened by hopelessness, would not see it. The villagers, busy with their own survival, would never suspect it. But the land remembered. And when the time came, it would not forget. The sun had barely risen when the farmer's wife began her day. She moved quietly through the small, worn house, careful not to disturb her husband still sleeping, though sleep came to him lightly, haunted by worry and despair. She filled the clay pot with water from the well, each drop heavy with the memory of last season's drought. The pot trembled slightly in her hands, but she carried it steadily, setting it carefully near the stove where a thin flame waited to warm the morning meal. The house smelled faintly of dust and old wood. A few worn mats covered the floor, and a faded curtain hung over the tiny window, swaying when the wind blew through cracks in the walls. The life she lived here was simple, but every small task demanded strength. There was no abundance, no comfort, no space for complaint. Hunger followed her quietly, like a shadow she could not outrun. She prepared breakfast for her husband, a small portion of grain and a few dry vegetables from the last harvest. She offered it with a gentle smile, one that carried no expectation, only hope. He ate in silence, his mind already wandering to the day's labor. They had no children, no laughter echoing through the house, no young voices to lift the quiet. Years of trying and failing had left a soft ache in her heart that she buried beneath her daily duties. Once he left for the fields, she began her own work. The farm demanded every ounce of her strength. She tilled the soil with care, planting seeds in neat rows, her hands pressing them gently into the cracked earth. To others, the land seemed exhausted and unworthy, yet she treated it like a companion. She spoke to it softly, thanking it for its patience, praising it for each small sign of life. Sometimes the soil responded, subtle at first. A warmer patch here, a stronger sprout there, a quiet rhythm that felt like acknowledgement. She moved through her day alone. Each chore reminded her of the hardships she carried silently. The neighbors' laughter from better harvested farms stung, but she did not envy them. She only hoped. Hope had become her quiet rebellion against despair. Some nights, when her body ached and her hands were blistered, she prayed, not for wealth, not for children, not for escape, but for the strength to endure, for the courage to keep nurturing what others had abandoned. Her marriage bore the strain of their shared hardships. Her husband's eyes, once warm and bright, now held shadows. He blamed the land, blamed the seasons, blamed fate for their failures. Sometimes he blamed her, though she never returned anger for anger. She had learned the power of quiet patience, of keeping sorrow close but letting love guide her actions. Each evening, she returned to the house carrying her small victories: a row of sprouting seeds, a patch of ground turned fertile again, a meal prepared despite scarcity. Loneliness sat beside her like an invisible companion. She longed for someone to see her efforts, to understand the silent devotion she gave to the earth and to her family. Yet the loneliness was not bitterness. It was a weight she bore with dignity. She found companionship in the rhythm of the soil, the gentle sway of leaves in the wind, the small songs of birds that visited the barren fields. The world outside the farm was harsh, but she had learned to listen, not only with her ears but with her heart. She noticed subtle signs others ignored: the way the wind shifted before a storm, how the roots of certain plants seemed stronger after rain, how the soil held memories of past seasons. Sometimes at night she could feel it beneath her feet, a faint thrum like a heartbeat. It spoke to her in silence, revealing stories she could not yet understand, warnings of what might come. Even as hunger and hardship pressed against her, she found moments of quiet joy. A new sprout breaking through dry soil. A bird's song at dawn. The smell of fresh earth after the first rain. These simple gifts reminded her that life persisted even in the harshest conditions. She nurtured it, and in return, the land seemed to nurture her spirit, giving her courage to face each day anew. Through it all, she remained faithful. Not to promises of wealth, not to easy rewards, but to the principle that care, patience, and respect could cultivate life even in despair. She carried the weight of her losses with grace and resilience, knowing that every act of quiet devotion mattered, even if no one else noticed. She had learned that the land required patience, the heart required endurance, and survival demanded courage. And so, day after day, she labored in silence. Her strength was not loud or dramatic, but steady and enduring. Her love for the land, for her home, for the life she fought to sustain, was unwavering. Though hunger gnawed and hardship pressed, she moved through the fields with steady hands and a watchful heart, listening to the whispers of the soil that promised, if one only paid attention, the earth would always remember. The morning began like any other, pale sunlight stretching over the cracked fields. The farmer had already left for the far edges of the land, muttering complaints under his breath as he checked for signs of life in the parched soil. She stayed behind, carrying a small hoe and a wicker basket, her feet careful on the uneven ground. She moved with the practiced rhythm of someone who had labored in these fields for years, a rhythm born of patience and quiet endurance. Her eyes fell on a section of earth that had been untouched for years, a patch the drought had turned brittle and unyielding. She knelt, pressing the palms of her hands against the rough soil. Something stirred beneath her touch. At first, it was subtle, almost like the vibration of a distant drum beneath the ground. She paused, her heartbeat quickening. The wind had fallen silent, and the world seemed to hold its breath. As her fingers dug deeper, the soil shifted with an unusual warmth, almost alive. It pressed against her hands as if resisting her intrusion, yet inviting her to uncover its secret. She worked cautiously, scraping away dry layers, and a faint golden glow began to appear beneath the surface. The light was soft at first, almost imperceptible, but it pulsed steadily, like a heartbeat rising from the depths of the earth. Fear prickled her skin, but curiosity held her rooted. She had seen many things in these fields, strange shapes in the morning mist, unusual growth in the soil, but never anything like this. It was beautiful and terrifying, radiant yet unsettling. She whispered a small prayer under her breath, not asking for gold, not asking for wealth, only for understanding. Finally, she unearthed it completely. Her eyes widened at what lay before her. It was gold, but not ordinary gold. It seemed to breathe, to pulse with warmth, alive in a way that made her stomach twist. The metal shimmered like molten sunlight, yet moved subtly as if it had a mind of its own. She felt its heartbeat in her chest, a strange resonance that made her arms tingle and her head swim. The earth itself seemed to hum in response, vibrating through her knees and hands. Every instinct in her body screamed that this was no ordinary discovery. This was not treasure meant for human hands. Something ancient and powerful slept beneath the soil, and now it had awakened. She stepped back, her heart hammering in her chest, and the glow dimmed slightly, like a shy creature recoiling from sudden attention. Yet the moment she leaned closer, it brightened again, pulsing faster, almost urgently. She reached forward, her fingers brushing the edges, and the warmth rushed through her body in a flood of emotion she could not name: fear, wonder, awe, and something darker, something that hinted at a long memory buried deep in the earth. A whisper rose in her mind, not words but images. She saw hands digging in greed, tearing life from the soil. Faces of ancestors appeared, eyes filled with hunger, anger, and betrayal. She saw rivers of gold turning to molten sorrow, spilling into the ground where it belonged, feeding something that waited patiently for centuries. She blinked, shaken, and the images vanished, leaving only the heartbeat of the earth beneath her fingers. The glow pulsed again, softly this time, as if testing her. The soil around it seemed alive, subtle movements shifting like roots stretching beneath the surface. She realized that this gold was not a blessing in the way humans imagine blessings. It was something far older, far more complex, something that required respect and understanding, or it would demand a price. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She could not tear her eyes away. The gold responded to her presence. It did not speak, it did not move like an animal, yet it reacted. Each movement, each small gesture she made, was mirrored in the pulse of light, the warmth in the soil. She touched it again gently, and the vibrations traveled up her arms, through her chest, stirring emotions she had not felt in years: hope, longing, fear, and an almost unbearable sense of responsibility. A distant crow cawed, breaking the spell. She exhaled slowly, pulling her hands back, though her fingers lingered on the edge of the glowing mass. The sun climbed higher, and yet the gold refused to fade completely. She knew she could not leave it here. She could not simply pretend it did not exist. But she also understood instinctively that this was not something to take lightly. For the first time she felt the weight of true discovery. She felt the pull of temptation, the lure of riches that could change her life and her husband's. But above all, she felt the pulse of the earth beneath it all, a reminder that it remembered everything. It remembered the past, it remembered greed, it remembered patience and kindness alike. And now it remembered her. She covered the gold partially with soil, not fully burying it, not fully exposing it, and stepped back. Her knees ached, her hands trembled, and her heart raced with a mixture of fear and awe. Something alive slept beneath the ground, something ancient and aware, and she had awakened it. She did not yet know what it wanted or what she would need to do next. But one thing was certain: the land had shifted that day and her life would never be the same. The fields were quiet once more, but the pulse remained, a low, insistent beat in the soil, a reminder that some treasures are alive, and some secrets demand to be honored. The night after she discovered the gold, the farmer's wife could not sleep. The small clay lamp beside her bed flickered, casting long shadows on the walls of their worn house. Her mind replayed the day over and over, the warmth of the earth beneath her fingers, the pulse of the gold as if it had been waiting for her. The memory made her heart race and her hands tremble. She did not know whether to feel fear, wonder, or a strange mixture of both. At dawn, she returned to the hidden patch in the field. The earth had settled since yesterday, but the glow still pulsed faintly beneath the soil, like a heartbeat slowing in its sleep. She knelt, brushing away dry dust carefully, as if disturbing the gold too abruptly could make it vanish, or worse. The moment her hands hovered above it, the warmth returned, spreading through her palms, her arms, and into her chest. She whispered a small prayer, not for riches but for guidance. The gold seemed to respond, flickering softly in acknowledgement. It was as if it understood her intentions, her hesitation, her quiet devotion. She realized then that this was no ordinary discovery. The gold was alive. It could sense her presence, her thoughts, her emotions. And in some subtle way, it was communicating, testing, learning from her as she learned from it. Days passed and she returned in secret. She brought no tools, no baskets, nothing but her hands and her attention. Each time she felt a connection growing between herself and the living gold. It pulsed differently for her than it had for the soil alone. When she approached, it seemed almost gentle, responsive, as though it trusted her. Sometimes it shimmered with brighter hues, almost like joy. Other times it grew dim and heavy, like sorrow. She began to sense moods within it, as if the gold had memories, feelings, or awareness that stretched back centuries. But the gold was not static. Over days and weeks, it began to shift in shape, growing slightly larger, curling and twisting beneath the soil, stretching like roots searching for nourishment. Its movements were slow and deliberate, and each time she felt a tug of something she could not name, a mixture of fear and awe, fascination and caution. At night, her dreams became restless. She saw visions of the past embedded in the land, hands tearing fields apart in greed, promises broken under the sky, blood soaking into the earth. Faces appeared, ancestors, strangers, villagers long gone, looking at her with eyes that pleaded, scolded, or warned. Rivers of molten gold flowed through the soil, feeding the unseen force beneath the surface. She woke sweating, her heart pounding, yet she also felt a strange serenity, as though the gold was teaching her something she had not known she needed to learn. The secret weighed on her like a living thing. She knew she could not tell her husband, not yet and perhaps never. He would see only wealth, only the chance to escape their endless struggle. He could not understand what the gold truly was. And even if he tried, he might awaken its darker side, feeding its hunger in ways she feared would destroy everything. She began to speak to it in whispers, soft words, a voice that carried care and respect. She did not know if it understood, but it pulsed in reply, warm and insistent, as if it were listening. The bond between them grew, silent and intimate, forming in the space between heartbeats, in the quiet moments when no one else watched. It became her confidant, her guardian, her secret companion in a life of hardship and solitude. Yet she felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her. The gold was not simply treasure to be hoarded or a gift to be claimed. It was a living force shaped by the greed, sorrow, and betrayal of generations past. It demanded respect, vigilance, and an awareness of the consequences of human desire. She understood that one careless word, one selfish thought, could awaken its anger. And so she worked in silence. By day she tended the fields, cared for her husband, and performed her household chores. By night she returned to the hidden patch, tending the gold as one might a fragile seedling, careful not to disturb its balance. The land around it seemed to hum with anticipation, waiting for something that neither she nor the villagers could yet comprehend. In the quiet moments, she began to wonder about the price of such power. She wondered if she would ever be able to share this secret, if the gold would allow her to do so without tragedy. She felt its presence constantly, pulsing beneath the soil, a reminder that the land remembered everything, past sins, present intentions, and the choices yet to come. Her life became a delicate balance between secrecy and care, between devotion and fear. She carried the gold's memory with her, a hidden heartbeat beneath her own, intertwining her existence with something far older than herself. The connection was intoxicating, frightening, and beautiful all at once. It shaped her days, guided her thoughts, and stirred something in her soul she had never known, the weighty awareness that some secrets were alive, and some forces demanded both patience and sacrifice. As she knelt in the soil once more, hands hovering above the pulsing gold, she whispered a vow to herself. She would protect it, honor it, and listen. The earth had remembered her ancestors' mistakes, and she would not repeat them. The gold stirred gently, a living, breathing presence that seemed to answer her promise. And in that quiet, hidden corner of the field, the seed of a bond was planted, one that would test her courage, her faith, and her love in ways she could not yet imagine. The secret weighed heavily on her, but secrets have a way of revealing themselves. One afternoon, while she tended the hidden patch, her husband appeared behind her, his shadow stretching across the earth like a dark omen. His eyes, usually dulled by years of struggle, were suddenly sharp and alert. He had noticed the way she spent more time in the fields, how she seemed absorbed in something beyond the soil itself. And now, his curiosity had grown into insistence. He demanded to know what she hid, and the quiet, cautious facade of the farm could no longer hold its breath. Reluctantly, she revealed a glimpse of the gold, enough for him to understand its shimmering allure, but not its living, dangerous nature. His eyes widened, and a flicker of something long buried stirred within him. Hope. Hope that promised freedom from debt, hunger, and the endless cycle of toil that had defined their lives for years. He saw the gold only as escape, as wealth, as power. He did not see its pulse, its subtle awareness, its warnings. Greed took root quickly. He spoke in hushed tones of selling portions of the farm, of gathering wealth to rebuild their lives. Each word dripped with desire, each glance at the gold sparked a hunger that the earth beneath them seemed to notice. The soil shivered subtly under their feet, a quiet warning that the gold's patience was not infinite. Rumors, as they always do, began to ripple through the village. Neighbors watched the couple with curiosity. Traders passing along the dirt paths noticed unusual activity at the farm. The gleam of something precious had traveled in whispers before it had even left the earth. Eyes lingered and suspicion grew. Some villagers approached, asking questions masked as concern. Others loitered nearby, hoping for a glimpse of fortune. The gold, alive and perceptive, reacted. It pulsed faster whenever greed approached, radiating warmth when its presence was respected and trembling when threatened. Animals avoided the fields where it lay, birds circling above instead of landing. Even the wind seemed cautious, carrying a low hum that vibrated through the soil. The land itself was uneasy, aware of the changing intentions that humans brought to it. The wife tried to temper her husband's excitement, reminding him of patience, of care, of the unseen forces that guided the land. But her warnings fell on deaf ears. His mind had been unburdened by hope for so long that the gold became a lure too strong to resist. Where she saw danger, he saw opportunity. Where she felt life's quiet rhythms, he felt the heartbeat of fortune calling his name. Outside forces sensed it too. Relatives who had long envied the family's small patch of fertile land started visiting under the guise of concern. Traders lingered, offering strange and urgent deals. Even strangers appeared, their curiosity thinly veiled as business or interest, but their eyes betrayed the hunger that followed greed. Each approach was dangerous. The gold reacted subtly but unmistakably. Soil near the patch would crack under hostile intentions, roots twisted unnaturally, and the faint pulse beneath the surface grew erratic. The wife felt the warnings in her bones. The gold was not gold alone. It was the memory of the earth, the inheritance of mistakes, the consequence of generations of human desire. Her husband ignored these signs. He was drawn deeper into obsession. He measured the fields, spoke of dividing the earth for profit, and imagined a life of comfort and security. Each day he returned to the patch, eager to touch, to claim, to understand the treasure in the way he thought he could control it. The more he sought to possess it, the more alive and aware the gold became, sensing the weight of human greed pressing down upon it. The wife began to feel an unfamiliar fear. Not for herself, but for the consequences of human desire untempered by care. She realized that this gold was not something to be mined or owned. It was a living force, and if it was disturbed recklessly, it would demand its due. Its justice was not human, and its memory was long. She watched her husband's obsession grow, powerless to stop it fully, torn between loyalty, love, and fear. Each day the village seemed to tighten around them, drawn by whispers and rumors, and each night, the gold pulsed beneath the earth, alive and restless. The weight of the secret, once hers alone, was no longer a private burden. It had spread, infecting desire, awakening envy, stirring the darker impulses in those who came near. And the wife understood, with a cold certainty, that the balance of the land, of their lives, and perhaps of the village itself, now rested on a fragile edge. One misstep, one act of greed, and the pulse that had been subtle, quiet, and hidden might awaken fully, demanding a price no human could ever predict or control. The gold waited beneath her fingers, alive and aware, while the seeds of human greed began to bloom all around it. The living gold had been hidden in the soil for centuries, but now it stirred with a purpose. At first the change was subtle. Crops near the patch of earth where it lay began to grow unnaturally fast, their stalks bending under weight before she could even harvest them. The soil farther away dried and cracked, turning to dust despite rain. The balance of the land shifted, responding to the gold's awakening. The wife noticed it immediately. She knelt beside the glowing treasure, feeling its pulse beneath her hands. It was no longer a passive presence. It demanded attention, not with words but with vibrations, warmth, and subtle movements that tugged at her heart and mind. Each time she approached, she sensed an urgency, as if the gold hungered for more than mere care. It fed on life, on energy, on human emotion itself. Those who approached with desire, greed, or even curiosity suffered quickly. A neighbor, drawn by rumors of treasure, wandered into the fields uninvited. He reached down and touched the soil where the gold lay just beneath the surface. Within hours, he fell ill with a strange fever, his mind restless and haunted by visions of long-forgotten bloodshed. Traders who lingered too long left without a single coin exchanged, shaken by dreams that seemed to come from the earth itself. Even the husband began to feel it, the subtle warning beneath his greed, but instead of caution, obsession deepened in his chest. The wife understood the truth. This gold fed on human desire. It did not want to be mined or owned. It thrived on the intentions and emotions of those who came near, and its memory was as long and unforgiving as the soil itself. She saw it now for what it truly was, the product of generations of injustice. Somewhere in the past, ancestors had taken land not theirs to claim, spilled blood in the name of wealth, and broken oaths meant to bind humanity to the earth. This gold, pulsing beneath her fingers, was the consequence of all that betrayal. Each day the gold's hunger grew. Its pulse quickened when she drew near, almost as if testing her emotions, measuring her patience and intentions. She could feel it in her chest, a strange resonance with her heartbeat. At times it seemed almost intelligent, aware of her thoughts and reacting to them. When she hesitated, it trembled. When she leaned forward with care, it shimmered softly, acknowledging her presence. The crops nearest the gold flourished beyond reason, corn taller than she had ever seen, roots bursting with life, but the land beyond wilted. Fields that had once yielded modest harvests now produced only brittle stalks and empty soil. The wife understood that the gold's life came at a cost. Every surge of growth, every pulse of energy drew from something else. Energy that could not be replaced, a balance that could not be maintained. Fear became constant. She could no longer ignore it. Each day she tended the gold, she felt the weight of generations pressing down on her shoulders. The past whispered to her in the rustle of leaves and the sigh of the wind. Blood spilled in ancient greed, betrayal unatoned, and promises broken centuries ago. All of it had formed this living treasure. And now the gold demanded to be acknowledged, tended, and understood. Her husband, meanwhile, could not see beyond his desire. He touched the soil greedily, imagining wealth, power, and the freedom it could bring. But the gold reacted sharply. Roots twisted beneath his feet, the pulse quickened into a violent rhythm, and unease spread through the farm. He fell ill briefly, fevered and unsettled, shaking with visions he could not interpret. Fear brushed his mind, but it could not outweigh obsession. He wanted what the gold promised, and he refused to see what it truly was. The wife realized the danger extended beyond her family. Anyone who approached with selfish intent risked the gold's wrath. The living treasure was no passive object. It enforced its own sense of justice, punishing greed, rewarding patience, and responding to emotion as surely as the sun rises. She knew that if the village discovered the full nature of the gold, chaos would follow. Fear, envy, and desire would drive the people into conflict, and the gold would feed on it, growing stronger with each misstep. At night, her dreams became more vivid and terrifying. She saw rivers of molten gold flowing over stolen lands, consuming those who had betrayed the earth. Faces of ancestors scolded her, pleaded with her, or simply stared, eyes full of warning and sorrow. The visions left her exhausted, yet they taught her something essential. The gold could not be tamed, only respected and understood. Its hunger was not random, it was deliberate. It sought balance, demanded recognition of injustice, and drew from the heart of those who approached it carelessly. She knelt beside the gold in the early hours, hands hovering just above its surface. The warmth pulsed through her, steady and insistent. She whispered to it, not asking for wealth or fortune, but for guidance, for understanding, for the strength to do what was necessary. The gold pulsed back, subtle but responsive, almost approving, almost alive in a conscious way that defied explanation. The land had shifted. The gold's hunger was no longer passive, it had become a force of nature. It demanded attention, vigilance, and respect. And the wife, its secret guardian, understood that her life, her husband's life, and perhaps the fate of the village itself, now depended on how carefully she navigated its presence. One misstep could feed its hunger in a way that no human could survive. The gold waited, patient but alive. Its hunger was deliberate, measured, and unrelenting. And beneath the soil, the heartbeat of centuries pulsed, reminding her that the earth never forgets, and that some treasures are not meant to be possessed, they are meant to be understood. The whisper of gold that had begun in the farmer's field now spread through the village like smoke in the wind. At first it was quiet murmurs. Have you seen the harvest at their farm? They've found something unusual beneath the soil. But whispers have a way of growing teeth. Soon, curiosity became suspicion, suspicion became desire, and desire became envy. Neighbors who once exchanged greetings with a polite smile now watched with narrowed eyes. Every movement of the couple drew attention, every gesture scrutinized. Children, sensing the tension, whispered tales of glowing soil and treasures that breathed. Traders loitered longer along the dirt paths, their voices carrying faint threats masked as negotiation. The land, once silent except for its natural rhythms, seemed uneasy, vibrating subtly as if aware of the emotions growing above it. The husband, already obsessed, became increasingly erratic. He spoke of wealth, of power, of finally escaping the chains of poverty. He measured, planned, and argued with neighbors about what should belong to him. Each day, he returned to the glowing patch with a mixture of reverence and hunger, touching it lightly, yet pushing the boundaries of respect. The gold responded, pulsating faster with each thought of possession, its energy surging in subtle warnings that went unnoticed by all but his wife. The wife, however, watched with growing dread. She felt the change in the soil, the subtle shiver of roots beneath her feet, and she understood that the gold's patience was thinning. It had begun to feed not only on desire but on the tension, fear, and resentment rippling through the village. Every whispered rumor, every envious glance, every whispered accusation fed its hunger, and she could feel the pulse growing stronger with each passing day. Old wounds in the village reopened. Families who had once fought over land, water, or pride saw an opportunity in the gold. Class resentment simmered, as those who had always been poorer or marginalized now imagined a way to claim what had been denied them. Jealousy flared between neighbors and polite greetings became sharp words, which turned into shouts, then threats. The gold, beneath the soil, pulsed in rhythm with the growing chaos, as if sensing that conflict fed it more than admiration ever could. The husband distanced himself from his wife as obsession consumed him. Where she approached the gold with care, he approached it with hunger. Where she sought understanding, he sought control. And the more he pushed, the more he seemed to invite the gold's influence. The subtle warmth beneath his fingers became almost intolerable, like fire pressing against his skin, urging him to act, to claim, to dominate. Yet he could not see the danger that lurked beyond immediate gain. Soon the villagers' pressure became direct. A group of men and women, driven by curiosity and greed, approached the farm with demands. They accused the couple of hoarding wealth that belonged to the community. The wife watched silently, her heart heavy, knowing that confrontation was inevitable. Words were exchanged, sharp and bitter. Threats hung in the air like storm clouds, and the gold pulsed violently beneath the soil, sensing their intentions and feeding on the discord. Fear spread quickly. The first accidents occurred almost immediately. A child playing near the edge of the field fell, uninjured but shaken. Livestock wandered off inexplicably. Small fires started and stopped without explanation. To the villagers, these events were omens, punishments for meddling with something they could not understand. To the wife, they were proof that the gold's power was growing, feeding on division, and responding to human greed and conflict with deliberate force. By night, the village had transformed. Once a place of cautious cooperation and quiet survival, it now resembled a community on edge. Families argued over property lines, over who had rights to water, over who should approach the gold first. Long-forgotten grudges resurfaced, stirred by whispers and rumors of wealth. Every moment of envy, every word of accusation, every act of suspicion fed the gold beneath the soil, making it stronger, more insistent, more alive. The wife realized the terrifying truth. The gold was not merely a source of temptation, it was a force that thrived on discord. Its hunger was fueled by human weakness, by ambition, by betrayal. And if the village continued down this path, there would be no turning back. Families might be ruined, friendships destroyed, and the land itself corrupted beyond repair. The gold had already begun to shape the lives of those above it, and soon, it would demand payment for every ounce of desire it consumed. She knelt in the quiet of the early morning, hands brushing lightly against the soil. The pulse beneath her fingers was rapid now, insistent, almost demanding. The land remembered all that had happened, all that was unfolding and all that would come. She understood, more clearly than ever, that human greed had awakened something beyond human control. The village's survival, her husband's soul, and perhaps even her own life now depended on her ability to act with wisdom, patience, and courage. The village had turned against itself. And beneath the surface, the gold waited, alive and insatiable, a hidden heartbeat that mirrored the chaos above. Every act of greed, every whisper of envy, every threat of violence fed its power. And the wife, silently tending the earth and watching her husband drift toward obsession, understood that the moment of reckoning was drawing near. The soil pulsed beneath her hands, alive with memory, with hunger, with ancient justice. The gold was no longer hidden, no longer patient, and the village, blind to its own desires, had become the perfect stage for the storm to come. The tension in the village had reached a fevered pitch. The once quiet farming community was now a place of suspicion, envy, and unrest. Families whispered accusations, neighbors eyed one another with distrust, and the air itself seemed heavy, charged with anticipation of misfortune. The gold beneath the soil pulsed relentlessly, feeding on every flicker of desire, fear, and jealousy above it. Inside the small house, the wife watched her husband with a heart weighed down by dread. He had changed. Obsession had replaced reason in his eyes. Hunger had replaced caution. He spoke less of shared survival and more of wealth, power, and escape. Each time he returned to the glowing patch in the fields, she could feel his desire radiating outward, touching the gold and feeding it, growing the pulse beneath the soil faster, brighter, more insistent. She loved him still, even as fear gripped her. That love, however, was no longer simple or quiet. It was complicated, bound with worry and moral responsibility. She realized she could not allow his greed to continue unchallenged. Every act of selfish desire sent ripples through the earth, and she understood that the gold would not stop at punishing him. It would consume the village, disrupt the land, and perhaps destroy all that she held dear. The choice before her was clear yet agonizing: protect her husband and risk disaster, or confront the gold and risk losing him entirely. Her chest tightened with the weight of the decision, each heartbeat echoing the pulse of the living treasure beneath the soil. She could not hide from the truth. The gold demanded an act of selflessness, a surrender that went beyond simple courage. To stop it, to calm its hunger, she would have to act in a way that tested the limits of her love, loyalty, and morality. She spent nights in restless meditation, hands brushing lightly over the glowing soil, whispering apologies to the earth, prayers to the unseen forces that lingered in the fields. She understood, with painful clarity, that love was not simply protecting those you cherished. Love was sacrifice, courage, and moral action, even when it caused personal suffering. Her husband, unaware of the depth of her reflections, approached the patch one evening with a hand outstretched. He spoke of dreams, of plans, of freedom from their burdens. But the gold pulsed violently beneath the surface, reacting to his unchecked ambition. The warmth of the soil became almost unbearable, pressing against him, vibrating through the soles of his feet and the tips of his fingers. Fear flickered in his eyes, but desire blazed brighter, and he ignored the warnings. The wife stepped forward, placing her hands lightly on his arms, her touch gentle but firm. "You must stop," she whispered. Her voice carried the weight of years of struggle, of understanding, of love tempered by hardship. "If you continue, you risk everything, not just for us but for the village, for the land, for all that lives here." He hesitated, torn between belief and desire. In that moment, she saw the conflict within him, the brief flash of reason clashing with obsession. And in that same moment, she realized that the gold could only be silenced through her own actions, through her willingness to offer something greater than desire, something deeper than greed, something rooted in pure selflessness. She knelt, pressing her palms against the warm, pulsing earth. The gold reacted immediately, its light brightening, its pulse quickening, as though it had sensed her readiness to act. She whispered a vow, not to claim it, not to use it, but to honor it, to respect it, to allow it to find balance once more. It responded with a subtle shiver beneath her fingers, a rhythm that mirrored her heartbeat. Her husband watched, a mixture of fear and awe painting his face. The choice was now his as well, to follow desire or to heed caution. But she knew that the first act had to come from her courage, her moral strength, her selfless love. And as she drew herself closer to the earth, she understood that love was being tested in a way that demanded not words or promises, but action. The gold pulsed faster, demanding her attention, challenging her resolve. She breathed deeply, letting her emotions flow without attachment, allowing the earth to receive her intentions freely. In that quiet, electric moment, she understood that the power of selflessness could calm even the most ancient hunger. That her love, guided by wisdom and moral courage, could redirect the destructive force of greed and fear that had consumed her husband and the village. For the first time since the gold had awakened, she felt a fragile sense of hope. The pulse beneath the soil no longer demanded recklessness. It demanded respect, understanding, and courage. And she, with her heart stretched between love and moral duty, was ready to meet it. Dawn broke over the village with an unnatural hush. The usual chatter of birds and rustle of leaves seemed subdued, as if the land itself held its breath. The villagers, driven by greed and curiosity, had gathered near the fields. Their whispers and demands had become urgent cries, accusing the farmer and his wife of hoarding treasure, of breaking the natural balance, of claiming what did not belong to them. The wife stood at the edge of the glowing patch, hands pressed together, knuckles white. Her heart pounded in rhythm with the pulse beneath the soil. The gold had awakened fully now, its light brighter, its warmth more insistent. It was alive, aware, and demanding attention, not the shallow greed of humans, but a reckoning for centuries of betrayal, injustice, and exploitation. Her husband approached, eyes wide, desire and fear warring in his gaze. "We can take it," he whispered, voice trembling. "We can use it, sell it, change everything. Why should it belong only to us?" She shook her head, a mixture of sorrow and resolve in her eyes. "It does not belong to anyone," she said softly. "It belongs to the earth, to the memory of everything that has been done here. If we take it selfishly, it will demand payment, more than we can imagine." The villagers stepped closer, some carrying tools, others with eager hands, all seeking what they could not comprehend. The gold pulsed violently beneath the soil, its energy spreading outward, shaking the fields. Roots twisted and cracked, crops bent unnaturally, and the air vibrated with tension. Fear rippled through the crowd, but desire was stronger, pushing them forward despite the warnings written in the land itself. The wife knelt beside the gold, her hands brushing lightly against its warm surface. She whispered a vow, offering what the gold could not consume: forgiveness for those who had harmed the earth, surrender of selfish desire, and her willingness to bear the weight of its judgment. The soil shivered beneath her touch, responding to the selflessness in her heart. Her husband watched, torn between instinctive greed and the strange, undeniable force emanating from the gold. A tremor ran through the ground as if the earth itself were testing him. The villagers gasped as the pulse grew stronger, almost audible, like a heartbeat magnified 100-fold. The living gold had awakened fully, revealing the power it had long contained, the memory of blood spilled, promises broken, land stolen, and greed unchecked. The wife stood slowly, pressing herself between the gold and the crowd. She looked each villager in the eye, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "Step back. Leave this place. The gold is alive, and it is not mercy, it is justice. Every action, every desire, every act of greed here will have consequences." A sudden violent shudder ran through the earth. Crops bent as if blown by a phantom wind, the ground cracked in shallow fissures, and a low hum resonated from beneath the soil. The villagers stumbled, fear overtaking greed. Some fell to their knees, some fled, but the more stubborn ones advanced, hands reaching for the glowing treasure. The gold responded instantly. Pulsing, alive, it lashed out, not with violence but with consequence. The earth beneath the greedy fractured. The crops nearest them wilted instantly, their leaves curling and browning. Livestock stamped and fled, and even the wind seemed to howl a warning. The wife felt the vibration beneath her hands, a combination of pain and power, warning that the price demanded would not be partial. Her husband, finally seeing the danger, faltered. His hands trembled over the gold, desire clashing with fear. The wife reached for him, pressing her palms against his chest. "Let go," she whispered. "Let the gold judge the earth, not us. You cannot hold it, only respect it." Tears streamed down her face as the villagers began to scatter, some running in fear, others stunned by what they had witnessed. The gold pulsed violently one final time, then slowly began to calm, its light dimming yet still warm. The trembling of the earth softened, the crops straightened slightly, and the hum faded into the quiet rhythm of the land. But the price had been paid. The fields nearest the gold were scorched, roots twisted and blackened, evidence of the cost of greed. The villagers who had pressed too close were shaken, some injured, all humbled. The husband collapsed beside his wife, exhausted and shivering, the weight of desire and fear still heavy on his shoulders. He looked at her with a mixture of shame, awe, and gratitude, finally understanding the lesson he had ignored for so long. The wife, weary but resolute, brushed soil from her hands. She had offered herself in the act of selflessness, absorbing the tension, the potential disaster, and the moral burden. The gold, sensing her purity of intention, allowed the land to heal slowly, marking the moment of reconciliation with a pulse that lingered gently beneath the soil. The village would never be the same. The gold had reminded them of the cost of greed, the weight of ancestral sins, and the power of the earth's memory. And in the quiet aftermath, the wife understood something profound. Redemption is never without sacrifice, justice never without pain, and the earth demands acknowledgement, respect, and care above all else. As she held her husband close, feeling his breath slow and his hands tremble less, she knew that the price had been paid, not in gold, not in wealth, but in understanding, in humility, and in the courage to act selflessly when the world demanded it most. The land, scarred but alive, had spoken. And for the first time in decades, the village listened. Weeks passed after the confrontation, and the village began to breathe again. The tension that had hung like a thick fog over the fields slowly lifted, leaving space for quiet reflection. The gold, once alive and pulsing beneath the soil, had disappeared. Or perhaps it had simply returned to the earth, its life force dissolved into memory and balance. The patch where it had lain glimmered faintly in the sunlight, but no warmth or pulse remained. It was as if the land itself had exhaled, relieved and yet scarred by the lessons it had imposed. The fields nearest the gold bore evidence of the price that had been paid. Crops had begun to grow again, but not without blemish. Twisted roots, uneven soil, and faint patches of barren earth remained as reminders. Yet there was also new life. Seeds had taken root where despair and fear had once held sway. Small shoots pushed through cracked soil, fragile but determined, as though the earth had been reminded of its own resilience. The husband moved quietly through the fields, his hands brushing lightly over the soil. He no longer sought to possess, to control, or to dominate. Each touch carried reverence, humility, and gratitude. He looked to his wife, eyes softened by awe and understanding, realizing at last the depth of her courage and wisdom. He had been taught by the living gold that love and respect mattered more than desire and ambition, that the earth's memory was long and unforgiving, and that human greed always carried consequences. The villagers, too, began to repair the rifts that had formed during the frenzy. Families shared food and water once more, neighbors exchanged greetings and assistance, and old resentment softened under the quiet pressure of shared survival. The lessons of the gold lingered in their minds. Greed had consequences, respect for the land was paramount, and unity and care were the only way forward. The wife walked the fields daily, observing the delicate balance of life returning. She felt a quiet sense of pride and relief, tempered with sadness for the damage done. The gold had demanded a price and it had been paid, not in coins, not in wealth, but in awareness, selflessness, and change. She understood now that her role had been more than that of a caretaker of crops or a silent partner in hardship. She had been a guardian of the land's memory, its justice, and its pulse. Though the gold no longer glimmered beneath her hands, its presence lingered in subtle ways. The earth seemed more attentive, the crops more responsive to care, and even the wind carried a gentle warning of balance and patience. The village had learned humility and with it, the fragile promise of renewal. The husband joined her one evening as the sun sank behind the hills, painting the sky with warm orange and pink hues. They walked the fields together, hand in hand, feeling the soil beneath their feet. Their love had endured, tested and transformed by obsession, fear, and moral challenge. Now it was tempered by understanding, by shared responsibility, and by the recognition that some forces, whether gold, land, or legacy, could not be possessed, only honored. The scars of the gold remained, both in the earth and in the hearts of the villagers, but they were not wounds without meaning. They were reminders of the lessons learned, the sacrifices made, and the importance of living with care, humility, and respect. The land slowly healed, vibrant patches of green weaving through the blackened soil, a testament to resilience and hope. And in the quiet moments as the wind rustled through the fields and the sun bathed the village in its gentle glow, the wife understood something profound. Life continues even after the most consuming force has faded. Growth returns tempered by experience. Renewal comes not from possession but from understanding. And those who heed the lessons of the past can walk forward, wiser, stronger, and more connected to the pulse of the earth beneath their feet. The gold was gone, but its legacy remained, etched in soil, memory, and the hearts of those who had survived. Years passed, and the village began to settle into a quieter rhythm. The fields, once scarred by greed and obsession, had slowly healed. Crops grew steadily, the soil regained its resilience, and the community learned to work together with care rather than conflict. Children ran through the fields freely, laughter replacing the tension that had once gripped the village. But no one, not even the youngest, forgot the lessons whispered by the land. The story of the living gold became legend, told by elders beside fires and under wide, starlit skies. Parents warned their children, respect the soil beneath your feet, tend to the land with humility, and never let desire cloud judgment. The earth remembers, they said. Every choice, every act, every thought, do not forget. The land holds memory longer than any of us can. The farmer and his wife lived quietly on their healed land, their relationship forever altered by the trials they had endured. The husband moved with a measured calm now, hands gentle on the soil, mind humble and aware. The wife remained a steadfast guardian, carrying the weight of memory, respect, and wisdom that the gold had imparted. She had survived, transformed by the events, and her presence became a symbol of vigilance and moral strength. Even as life returned to normal, subtle reminders lingered. Seeds sprouted in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, and the wind carried whispers that only the most attuned could hear. On quiet nights, the pulse of the earth beneath the surface seemed to echo faintly, a reminder that memory never fades entirely. The gold had left, yet the lesson it had etched into the land endured, waiting for anyone who might forget the importance of respect, selflessness, and awareness of unseen forces. The villagers, too, carried the memory with them. They were no longer simply witnesses to the land, they had become participants in its story. Decisions about planting, harvesting, and sharing were made with mindfulness. Disputes that once flared now resolved through dialogue and care. Even the youngest generations learned that the soil beneath them was alive in its own way, watching, remembering, and silently judging. The wife often walked the fields alone, hands brushing lightly over the soil where the gold had once pulsed. She remembered the weight of responsibility, the pulse of the living treasure, and the sacrifices that had been made. And in her heart, she understood that some forces, no matter how dormant, would always be present, observing, waiting, reminding humans of the delicate balance between desire and respect. In the stillness of dawn, as sunlight poured across the fields and mist rose from the earth, the village slept peacefully, yet the land remained vigilant. It remembered the past, the greed, the fear, the love, and the courage. And it waited silently, a quiet sentinel, ready to respond should humans ever forget its lessons again. The soil still watched. It always had. It always would.